gods never saw it coming. 70 gladiators, men trained to kill with any weapon, had been planning in whispers for weeks. They knew the routines. They knew the shift changes. They knew that tonight only a handful of guards stood between them and freedom. It started in the kitchen, a simple fight over food. The guards rushed in to break it up and walked into a trap. Within minutes it was over. The guards were dead. The armory was open. 70 slaves who had been condemned to die for Roman entertainment now held swords in their hands and freedom in their hearts. Their leader was a Thracian named Spartacus. As they stood at the gates of the gladiator school, looking out at the night that promised either freedom or death, he spoke. "We were born free. They took that from us. Tonight we take it back. Every Roman legion will hunt us. Every road will have spies. Death may find us tomorrow, or next month, or next year. But we will die as men, not as entertainment." Then they ran into the darkness, and Rome's worst nightmare began. I am Aurelius, and tonight I tell you a story that Rome spent centuries trying to bury. The story of Spartacus, a slave who became a symbol, a gladiator who became a general, a condemned man who made the greatest military power in history question whether their entire system was built on a foundation of sand. This is not a simple story of good versus evil. Rome was not purely villainous, and Spartacus was not purely heroic. He did terrible things during his rebellion, things that cannot be excused or forgotten. But this story matters because it shows what happens when human beings who have been told they are property suddenly remember that they are people. It shows the power of dignity, and it shows why every empire built on oppression secretly fears the moment when the oppressed decide they have nothing left to lose. To understand what Spartacus became, you must understand what Rome made him. He was born in Thrace, roughly modern Bulgaria, sometime around 111 BC, a free man in a free tribe. We know almost nothing about his early life. The Romans did not keep detailed records of slaves before they became problems. What we know is that he was captured. Some sources say he was a Roman auxiliary soldier who deserted. Others say he was simply a Thracian warrior taken in battle. Either way, the result was the same: chains, auction, sale. He was purchased by a lanista, a trainer of gladiators named Lentulus Batiatus, who ran a gladiator school in Capua. There, Spartacus would be transformed from a prisoner into a weapon. Gladiator school was not training, it was breaking. The gladiators were kept in cells smaller than prison cells. They were fed just enough to build muscle. They were trained in combat for hours every day, pushed beyond exhaustion, punished brutally for any sign of resistance. The purpose was to create men who would fight to the death for the entertainment of Roman crowds. Men who had been so thoroughly dehumanized that they would kill other slaves rather than turn on their masters. Spartacus learned to fight. He learned Roman military tactics from the guards who oversaw his training. He watched how the school was organized, where the weapons were stored, when security was weakest. And he waited. 200 gladiators had originally planned to escape, but someone talked. The plot was discovered. Only 70 managed to break out before the trap closed. 70 men against the Roman Republic. It should have been a minor police action. A few days of hunting fugitives, some crucifixions as a warning, then back to normal. Instead, it became the Third Servile War, the largest slave rebellion in Roman history. The escaped gladiators fled to Mount Vesuvius, the same volcano that would one day bury Pompeii. It was defensible terrain, difficult for large forces to assault. Rome sent a militia of 3,000 men to end the rebellion. This was not a legion, just local forces poorly trained, expecting to round up a few dozen fugitives. They surrounded the mountain and waited. There was only one path down. The slaves would have to surrender or starve. Spartacus did something no one expected. He found vines growing on the volcanic slopes. His men wove them into ropes and ladders. In the middle of the night, they climbed down the sheer cliff face on the opposite side of the mountain, a feat the Romans thought impossible. At dawn, they attacked the Roman camp from behind. The militia panicked and fled. Spartacus captured their weapons, their supplies, their horses. Word spread like fire through the countryside. Slaves could defeat Romans. Within weeks, thousands of escaped slaves had found their way to Spartacus. Field workers, house servants, mine laborers. People who had been treated as property for their entire lives suddenly saw a chance, however slim, at freedom. By the end of 73 BC, Spartacus commanded an army of over 70,000 all. Rome began to take notice. They sent praetor after praetor, military commanders with real legions. Spartacus defeated them all. At Vesuvius, he used the terrain and surprise. At Picenum, he split his forces and hit the Romans from multiple directions. At Mutina, he caught a Roman army in a trap and annihilated it. His victories were not accidents. Spartacus had learned Roman tactics during his time as a gladiator and possibly as an auxiliary soldier. Now he turned that knowledge against his former masters, and with each victory, his legend grew. He was not just a rebel leader anymore, he was a symbol, proof that the Roman system was not invincible, that slaves were not naturally inferior, that the chains were held in place by fear, and fear could be broken. For nearly 2 years, Spartacus was the most wanted man in the ancient world. He could have escaped. Historians believe he planned to lead his followers over the Alps and back to their homelands in Thrace, Gaul, Germania. Freedom was within reach, but his army was not unified. Many of the escaped slaves wanted revenge more than escape. They wanted to raid Roman towns, take Roman wealth, make Romans suffer as they had suffered. The army split. Groups broke off to pillage the countryside. The discipline that had won battles began to fracture. Spartacus himself was not innocent of atrocities. When he held funeral games for a fallen lieutenant, he forced Roman prisoners to fight as gladiators, making them suffer the same dehumanization they had inflicted on others. His forces committed massacres that killed civilians alongside soldiers. This is not a story of a perfect hero. This is a story of human beings pushed beyond endurance, striking back at a system that had crushed them, and in that striking, sometimes becoming what they hated. Rome finally found a commander equal to the threat. Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome, a brilliant politician, and a general willing to use any means necessary. Crassus was given 8 legions, around 40,000 professional soldiers. He revived an ancient punishment called decimation. When one of his units broke and ran from Spartacus's forces, he had one in every 10 soldiers beaten to death by their comrades. The message was clear: fear Crassus, more than you fear the slaves. The Roman legions stopped running. Spartacus was pushed south, onto the Italian peninsula. Crassus built a wall across the narrowest point, a barrier of trenches and fortifications that trapped the slave army with the sea at their back. Spartacus tried to negotiate with pirates for ships to escape to Sicily. The pirates took his money and never appeared. He was trapped. In 71 BC, the final battle came. Spartacus knew he could not win. The Roman legions were closing from multiple directions. His army was weakened by hunger, by desertion, by months of running. But he had one last choice: how to die. When the battle lines formed, Spartacus did something remarkable. He brought his horse to the front of his army. In full view of his men and the Romans, he drew his sword and killed the animal. His officers were stunned. "Why?" they asked. "If we win," Spartacus replied, "I will have my pick of Roman horses, and if we lose, I will have no need of a horse." He was saying, "I will not flee. I will not seek escape. Whatever happens to my men will happen to me." The battle was a massacre. The slave army fought desperately, but they were outmatched by professional legions in open combat. Tens of thousands died on that field. Spartacus himself led charge after charge toward Crassus's position. He was trying to kill the Roman commander, to die taking his enemy with him. He cut down 2 centurions who stood in his path. He fought his way through the Roman line, bleeding from multiple wounds, until he was finally surrounded and brought down. His body was never found, lost in the carnage of a battlefield covered with the dead. 6,000 survivors of the battle were crucified along the Appian Way, the main road from Rome to Capua, where the rebellion had begun. Their bodies were left to rot for months as a warning. This is what happens to slaves who forget their place. Rome wanted to bury the memory of Spartacus. They wanted to pretend that their slave system was natural, inevitable, unchallengeable. But some memories cannot be crucified. What does Spartacus teach us 2,000 years later? The first lesson: dignity cannot be permanently stolen. You can chain a man's body. You can control his labor. You can buy and sell him like livestock. But somewhere inside every human being is something that cannot be sold, a kernel of self that knows its own worth, an ember of dignity that can be buried under years of degradation but never fully extinguished. Spartacus was told he was property. He was treated as property. Everything in Roman society reinforced the message that he was less than human, and yet when the moment came, he remembered he was a man. That ember caught fire. The second lesson: systems of oppression are more fragile than they appear. Rome had built the most sophisticated slave system in history. Legal frameworks, social customs, economic dependencies. Every institution reinforced the idea that slavery was natural and permanent. It took 70 men with kitchen knives to shake that system to its foundation. Every system that depends on convincing people they have no power is terrified of the moment when those people realize they do. Not because they will certainly win, Spartacus lost, but because the illusion, once shattered, is very hard to rebuild. The third lesson: how you face defeat is the final measure of who you are. Spartacus lost. His rebellion was crushed. His followers were crucified. But he did not surrender. He did not beg. He did not try to save himself at the expense of his men. He killed his horse and charged into the Roman line, fighting until his body gave out. This is why we remember him. Not because he won, he didn't, but because he showed that even in defeat, even in chains, even when facing certain death, a human being can choose dignity over submission. Rome won the battle. Spartacus won the memory. I am Aurelius, and this was the slave who made an empire tremble. On the memory. I am Aurelius, and this was the slave who made an empire tremble. The next video tells the story of the fire that destroyed Rome and the emperor who many believe started it. Nero. Click here to watch.